Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 472. A special Israel at War edition. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes and in merit of Baruch Binyamin ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yekusil ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Tadus ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. So the battle of the war wages on. Hostages still remain behind enemy lines. So our prayers, our hearts, our souls go out, continue to go out. Firstly to the biggest heroes of all, standing on the front lines, sacrificing their lives to protect the innocent lives of men, women, and children. To the hostages, Shvuyim, that God should protect them and release them as soon as possible, unscathed. And of course to all the families, broken hearts, shattered homes, firstly those that were massacred on Simchas Torah and those that have fallen on the battlefield. So it means we need to acknowledge all of that and understand their sacredness, the Kiddush Hashem that they all represent. At the same time, the war must be fought. You're dealing with bloodthirsty enemies calling for the destruction of every Jew and not ashamed about doing so. What can you say about people who just simply are blinded or convenient fools, however you want to describe them, actually destructive, that support people like that, savages like that? Hopefully we'll talk about that as well because it's part of the reality. So there's darkness on this earth. There's darkness, there are clouds that block the truth and obfuscate what God wants of all of us. But while we fight that battle, the most important battle of all is the battle for what we stand for. And that is to bring godliness and goodness and life and love into this world. And that never stops. That's the key. That our commitment to what we fight for, the goodness, is stronger than their passion, demonic passion, for evil and destruction. It's even stronger than our protecting ourselves. As much as protection, of course, is number one, you have to stop the bleeding and you have to protect yourself. But we're not satisfied with just protection. We want to take it further and actually use this as a springboard to once and for all usher in an age of total and lasting and forever peace, v'nasati shalom ba'aretz, and shalom in the entire world, with the coming of Moshiach. So when you look at these events, as dark as they are, as we see it, as the Torah sees it, as Chassidus sees it, as the Rebbe saw it, as the last gasps of a dark world. It doesn't minimize the darkness, but it gives perspective. So, with that, let's structure again this program as I've been doing, covering different items. Many questions keep coming in, of different sorts, both on a personal level, on a cosmic level, on a political level, on a military level. There's much to talk about. But I want to begin, I think, with a few key things. I've been always calling the first section strength and direction. Because when you're fighting a war, both the physical war and the spiritual war, and you could also call it the psychological, emotional war, it's critical, first and foremost, to have strength, confidence, and direction. The morale, what we are standing for, what we're fighting for, the values we represent, are as critical, if not more critical, than the actual ammunition, than the actual military strategy. Both are necessary. But it first begins, you have to know what you're driving, what you're fighting for and toward. So understandably, when there's a threat, an existential threat to the Jewish people, to Israel, there's a unity that alone gives you a cause to protect against that threat. But let's not forget again the vision. The vision is most important of all. Because at the end of the day, what do we want and what is victory? And victory is not just to vanquish our enemies. not just to eliminate, eradicate evil, is to make this world into the world the way God wanted it to be. That Israel shouldn't just be a protected land from enemies, like another Western country, that Israel should be a holy land, the promised land, a land that exports, that is saturated with and exports. God's word, God's mandate to the world, just as the Jewish people are those that are the people of the book, that are the witnesses and the ambassadors to bring God's mandate to the world, starting with Abraham, consummated at Sinai, to the world, not just to the Jewish people. So Israel is the place that, if Jews are in Nefesh, what is it in Elam, in space? That's Israel. The land of Israel is the holy land that goes hand in hand with that spiritual mission and calling to bring holiness. That's why it says when Moshiach comes, Asid Eretz Yisrael she'tispashel b'chol ha'aratzos, that Israel will spread to all the lands, and Yerushalayim will spread to all of Israel. What does that mean? It's not a conquest, it's an issue of a spiritual spreading. That the Israel energy, the energy of Eretz Yisrael, Kisarisim Malikim V'Anoshim V'Tuchal. Interesting, the name itself, the name given to Yaakov by Esau's Sar, by Esau's angel, is that you will wrestle with God and with men, and you will prevail, which means wrestle with the darkness of the world, and prevail, and bring what? Holiness into this world. That's what Israel is. It's not just a geographic location. It's a chosen land. It's a promised land. And God said, I'm giving it to my chosen people. Chosen for what? To bring the mandate of God to the entire world. That's what we're ultimately fighting for. That's the true meaning of Eretz Yisrael and its connection to the Jewish people. And to everyone. To the West, to the East, to Muslims, to Christians, to Muslims, to Buddhists, to people of other faiths, of no faiths, whatever it may be. Every human being created in a divine image. That's the calling. That's the vision. So, to have such a vision, right, provides direction, also provides confidence, because we've been on this journey for a long time, and we've faced many obstacles. It's not the first time we've had a challenge. And not only have we overcome the obstacles, we've become stronger, and more importantly, we've actually transformed the world in the process. That same very world that opposed us has become our allies. The Christian world once was brutal to the Jewish people. Even that is an understatement. And today, we have a Christian country. I don't call America a Christian country, but it was built by non-Jews, built by people from the Western world, from Edom. Let's call it Malchus Edom, Bnei Esav. However, in a way that embraces the principles of Torah. As the Rebbe would write in a number of letters to the presidents of the United States and spoke in many sichos about Malchus Shel Chesed, a country built on Chesed, on what Avraham Avinu taught, on the Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Neach that were given at Sinai, as the Rambam declares in Paskins at the end of chapter 8 in Hilchos Malachim. And of course, in that spirit became a haven for people everywhere, and of course the Jews. And that principle, that ideology has spread across the world. Today we have more free countries than ever before. Still not finished, but you see a progress. So it gives you much hope if you look at the panorama of history. That is what it comes down to. So when we're challenged like this, it tells you something. What's the first lesson you learn from the challenge? Is that we haven't finished the job, but more importantly, we may have become complacent in our mission. So your enemy sometimes reminds you of who you are. Who you are, what you stand for, and your values, because you have to now fight for it. It becomes crystal clear. And look what's happening. Literally a global wake-up call. Unprecedented, historic opportunity. Because everybody's awake and everybody's alert. It's touched a nerve. For the Jews for sure, but even for the non-Jewish world. And there are many civil people and many decent people. Yes, there are plenty of loud people coming from the other side, but that's part of the challenge. Whether it's coming from ignorance, whether it's coming from just plain hatred and antisemitism and other prejudices, regardless, it's all part of the battle. So we have our work cut out for us. That's very clear. But at the same time, we're told, and as I've discussed in previous programs, this is the end. This is close to the end of it all. So let's begin. Well, we've begun already, but to go into a little more specific, once I've said out some backdrop here, what can we learn from what the Rebbe said in the past? We spoke about the Gulf War in 1991, and prior to that in the 80s regarding Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Neach, and of course speaking much about the Middle East, Eretz Yisrael and its neighbors and its wars. What can we learn from that for today? So the first and most important lesson of all, and this of course is what a Rebbe is, like the Rebbe said about the Friedrich Rebbe, als Bavornt, means a Rebbe, as a leader of a generation, preempted everything, has addressed everything, sometimes specifically, sometimes it's more between the lines. Because that's what a Rebbe is, gives direction. So the first and foremost lesson is the actual methods of battle. Based on Siman Shin Chav Tes, because the Rebbe doesn't just speak about his opinion, it's Torah opinion. It's with the Torah, again, God's mandate. What does God say you do in a situation like this? When you have a sworn enemy, there are laws. There are laws called protecting life. Pekuach Nefesh it's called. So the Rebbe would quote extensively Siman Shin Chav Tes 329 in Shulchan Aruch that talks about that when you have an enemy and they come to your border, and even if they're coming to talk about commerce, so on Shabbos, even if it's Shabbos, you have to mobilize yourself because you're dealing with an enemy. They're coming to talk to you about business. They're not even armed, but they're an enemy. So you have right there clear direction. And since Torah is Torah's chesed, it's a Torah of love, and kol ha-Torah le'nitna l'laseh shalom ba'elam, the entire Torah came to bring peace. So why would the Torah say you have to mobilize? Because that's the way of peace when you're dealing with an enemy. If you know that for sure that person's not an enemy, so of course someone knocks on your door and wants to talk to you about business, if there's not an enemy, you can do that. Not on Shabbos, but the concept is there. But not when you're dealing with a sworn enemy. So besides the Torah part of it, it's also completely logical. Who doesn't think that way? You can't delude yourself into saying someone's, and how do we know they're an enemy? Read their constitution. See how they behaved in the last 75 years. So that's a very clear directive. And that's why the Rebbe was so insistent. This wasn't a hawkish thing. To finish every battle, destroy the enemy completely. As long as there's an enemy, even one fiber that remains, one vestige that remains is dangerous. During the Yom Kippur War, the Rebbe called, enter into Damascus, into Cairo. Not to stay there, but just to show. Because that will drive fear in the enemy as a deterrent. That's how it is. That's what a capital represents, a capital of a country. So this wasn't about conquering. This was not about, God forbid, killing people. This was about demonstrating that you're an enemy. We will completely vanquish the enemy. The Nazis had to be destroyed unconditionally. And then you can rebuild. And look at Germany today. Same thing with Japan. The mistake has been, time and again, that you kill some of them. You go halfway, a quarter way. You have mercy, you have compassion. Yes, we know they hide behind civilian shields, human shields. Well, that's their crime, not our crime. So you try the best, and Israel bends over backwards to protect those civilians, but you can't protect them completely because their own so-called protectors, quote-unquote protectors, are using them as shields. So you go with that moral certainty. We know what we're fighting for. We're not fighting to kill anyone. We're fighting for peace. We're fighting for justice. We're fighting for virtue. When I say justice, I don't mean vengeance. I mean justice as a just world. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is, an extension of that is, you nip an infection in the bud. You don't wait till it turns into a cancer. Look now what's happening. Had what should have been done, in a way it's an extension of point number one, but I'm elaborating. If what had to be done was you had eliminated the infection years ago, 25 years ago, whenever, we've never been able to build an infrastructure like this, with the tunnels, with the mazes, with the complexity. How many lives would have been saved? Yes, so sometimes that milder approach, if you wish, is not what brings peace. Again, because of an enemy. For many people misunderstood, or chose to misunderstand. The Rebbe, as a visionary, saw that very clearly. And he said so. He says it will cost lives. That wasn't a punishment. That wasn't a threat. It was just a matter of cause and effect. You leave the enemy intact, they will build and mobilize. Like they say, they will attack again and again and again. What about public opinion? Well, public opinion is part of the war. You could imagine the enemy has hired and has paid. You could see it from the trigger words that inflame certain Western liberal factions. That's clearly a PR campaign, a PR war that's been going on for a long time, focused on campuses, on media, on Hollywood, to try to capture the minds of America especially, because, as we know, Vietnam War was lost not on the battlefield, it was lost in America. Once you lost American support, the American public, there was no will to fight. So that's their strategy. I hope the United States understands this. Israel definitely must understand this. That's not you want to fight the battle of propaganda, by all means. But that cannot affect. You cannot have a war being fought. Imagine during World War II, every step of the way, they went to check back on CNN, in the media, what did the people say? That's not how you fight a war. Wars are bloody, and they're painful, and there are losses on both sides. And that's part of reality. You have to have your own moral conscience and your own moral clarity. But once you have that, that's what you have to follow. And let historians afterwards discuss, was it right, was it not right? Was it right that President Truman dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? They're still debating it, but he did it. And many see the merit in it, even though it must have been an extremely painful decision. Knowing exactly what the consequences would be, or not even knowing exactly, but knowing there would be dire consequences. But it ended the war, and who knows what would have happened had he not done it. So it's not advocating for the killing, it's just the worst of two evils. You have to choose the best of the worst, so to speak. And there are many more lessons to be learned, and I'll say one more on a more global vision level. And that is that this is not just a battle, as I said, between two countries, between two nations, two cultures, two religions. It's a battle ultimately of what God wants of this world. What Israel represents was not just what France represents for the French, or UK represents for the British, or United States represents for Americans, or Canada for Canadians, and so on. As I mentioned, it's a holy land. It's a biblical land. Everyone recognizes that. All the major religions have been fighting over the control of Jerusalem for thousands of years. It's a portal, an interface between heaven and earth. As we read in this week's chapter, Shara Shamayim, Jacob calls it, the gate to heaven when he realizes where he was resting. The Temple Mount. What does a gate to heaven mean? A place where heaven meets earth, where the divine meets existence, where the transcendent meets the immanent. This doesn't mean that every Jewish person is perfect. It means the Jewish cause, the Torah cause, that began with Abraham, Avram Avinu, over 3,800 years ago. And as I mentioned, was consummated at Sinai. That is the battle to bring that message to the world. Now the children of Abraham, including Ishmael, and including Esau, grandson, who become the ancestors in broad sense of, respectively, the Ishmaelites, which is the Arab Muslim world, and the Roman Western Christian world, Edom, Magdiel, Zuremi, as Rashi says at the end of Pasha Vayishlach, would be offered the Torah at Sinai, but they rejected it. But that helped prime them and prepare the ground that one day they would embrace the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Neach, which were given at Sinai, as the Rambam says. through their respective religions. As the Rambam writes as well, L'yasher saderach, they help pave the way. And when Moshiach comes, the positive elements of these faiths will be their legacy. They will serve God, all the same God. Based tefillah l'kol ha'amim, this will be my home, the Beis HaMikdash, a prayer, house of prayer for all people. And the Jewish people will be a light unto nations, which was what our role is right today as well. So that is the ultimate bigger picture, and what the real meaning of Eretz Yisrael is. So it's time has come when we see an existential threat like this to revisit and reclaim what does true Zion mean. Zion means a marker. Chassidus explains that Zion comes like a bittul. When you make a marker, it's a sign for something else. It represents a siman, a sign that reflects and channels something greater than itself. When you make a marker, the marker doesn't have any value of its own. It's telling you something. Like the Harabai, Shara Shamayim. It's a gate to somewhere. It's a gate to heaven. To re-embrace and reclaim the true meaning of Zion. This goes back to the time of the patriarchs. It goes back to the time of the Torah. So Yerushalayim was the word used, the name given by the combination between Avram, as the Medrash says, and one of the kings. So one called it Yore, one called it Shalom. And Yerushalayim is a combination. What does it mean? Complete faith, utter and complete reverence, I should say. Yireh Shalom. What is that? A measure of bittul, reverence to something greater. Yerushalayim is the place where the divine presence rests, especially in the Beis HaMikdash and the Har HaBayis, and in general Eretz Yisrael. So all these is what we need to now reclaim. And finally, from the Rebbe's words, that the prophecy shows that we're at the end stages, that these are the last battles, as brought from the Zohar, from other places. We spoke about the Balaturim, the Drashim, the Medrash Yalkut Shmeni, that the end is the bitter of Yishmael and Esau, which will ultimately usher us into the Gula Mitzvah Vashlema. So there you have a picture of lessons we can learn from things that Rebbe said. And this is just brief. I've spoken about it in previous weeks in this special series since the war broke out, since the atrocities of Simchas Torah, October 7th. And that's somewhat of a summary. Now, let's now go to a few key questions. So based on this, what is the best response to the battles being fought now? So the best response, summing up what I just said, is that a response is not just defense. The best defense is offense. This is a wake-up call to stand up for what we really are. Time to revisit what it means to be a Jew. Time to visit what it means Eretz Yisrael. As I said, to bring godliness to this world. That includes, unfortunately, at times to fight darkness, sometimes fighting it directly as is being done right now. But ultimately, it's far greater than that. It's transforming the world, not just eliminating evil, but transforming every person on this earth to be a godlier person. What is the best response to anti-Semitism? We see an alarming rise in anti-Semitic acts, anti-Semitic slogans. You see the marches, the protests on the campuses and other places. So here again, the response is not just to eliminate anti-Semitism. Of course, you have to in every way possible not just reject, but absolutely condemn any form of such hate talk in every possible way. But more than that, it's again not anti-Semitism. What do we stand for? What does a Semite stand for? Shame. Also, the name shame, similar to Tzion, a name that reflects being an ambassador of God's in this world. That's our response. And here's something interesting. I don't know if anyone's thought of it. in all of history, perhaps this is the only time, I would say not just perhaps, pretty certain, the only time that we can fight, that are dealing with anti-Semitism is not through just feeling helpless as we were for so many millennia at the mercy of our hosts, or fighting it in one way or another. But this is the first time we can do something more. We can use it as a springboard, as a catalyst, to launch a tremendous offensive and demonstrating what it means to be a Jew. How a Jew is a Kiddush Hashem, a living sanctification of God's name on this earth. A Oir L'Goyim, a light unto nations. That we, as children of Avram Avinu, brought civilization to this world. Stoko Mishpat, Laman Asher Yitzav Abonav Es Beise Achrav, as it says. Avram taught his children, his family, and all of us, descendants in the unbroken chain all the way back to Avram. Nase Tzedakah Mishpat. Instead of selfish paganism, Tzedakah Mishpat, kindness, charity, generosity, justice. And Avram is of Hamoin Goyim, as I mentioned. Yishmael, Esau are his children as well. And in one way or another, all the people in the world, you can say in some way, can trace their roots to Avram. And as such, definitely back to Noach, Bnei Noach, and definitely back to Adam and Chava. And as such, we call upon everyone. That's what we do today. We have that capacity. That could not have been done in previous centuries. At best, we could have asked for mercy. At best, we could have ingratiated ourselves, or in some way mitigated some of the hatred that was there, in some cases. But to go the other way around and just say, oh, you anti-Semitism, that's what we're seeing. Let us tell you what a Jew is. A Jew is the one that teaches the world not to have prejudice and not to have biases and not to have hatred and discrimination and not to be selfish, but to be divine and live up to the divine image in which you were created. We can come out now with a revolution of that call. The call of God, the mandate of God to the entire world. Okay. So another question came in, since this is the week of, this week we have not the Tes Kislev and Yud Kislev. Tes Kislev is the birthday and the yahrzeit of the Mittler Rebbe, and Yud Kislev is the Chag HaGeula of the Mittler Rebbe. So someone asked the question, what are some things we can learn from the teachings of the Mittler Rebbe to give us chizuk, strength during this time of war? So, the Mittler Rebbe became Rebbe right after the Alter Rebbe, of course. It was Tovkuf Ayin Gimel Chav Dalet Tevis when the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic. This was the middle of the Russo-Franco War. So there was a war being fought. So the first place to look is how the Mittler Rebbe's attitude was to this war. So indeed, there's much to learn from that alone. So we know that the Alter Rebbe opposed France. He supported that Alexander of the Russian Tsar should win over France, even though France had promised, and the promise of making life easier materially for the Jewish people, liberty, freedoms, and under Alexander would be far more oppressive. Still, under France it was godless, and the Alter Rebbe was concerned of the effect that would have on the spiritual state of the Jewish people. And he wrote a letter explaining that, what Bonaparte, he writes, represented, Napoleon Bonaparte. The Mittler Rebbe has another letter that continues the Alter Rebbe and elaborates on the Alter Rebbe's position. So what was the real issue here? Obviously they had their war for their whatever, for territorial or for pride or vanity, whatever their war was about. Not getting into that. What was the deeper meaning behind the war? It's a spiritual war. It's a war, what kind of world would be created? Now the Alter Rebbe in his vision and prescience was able to recognize what was happening. The winds of freedom were beginning to blow, which is a great blessing, of course. That Jews shouldn't be oppressed, the emancipation of the Jews, the Alter Rebbe of course supported that. But he also understood, and the Rebbe makes this very clear in the Sikha Vayeshev Tavshin Nun Beis, that he understood like Yaakov did, that even though Esau and Yaakov embraced at the end of the story in Parsha Vayishlach, next week's Parsha, even though they embraced, and according to some opinions, it was a sincere, complete embrace, but still Yaakov realized, no, we're not ready to live side by side. So though Esau offered that, Yaakov realized the children are young, the sheep are tender. You go ahead, I'll come slowly. And as Rashi explains, what does that mean? That he will come slowly. Will come the day when the Geula will come. Like the end of Malachi. And there ultimately be peace, but we're not ready yet. So the Rebbe explains that was similar to what the Alter Rebbe was feeling. Initially, Yaakov thought Esau was ready for the Geula, as Chassidus brings, the Rebbe cites it quite often. But then he realized it's not the case. Alter Rebbe realized, yes, of course we have to refine the world, including France, including the Western world. But the Jews are not ready yet. If they would be emancipated right there and then, assimilation would ravage. Look what happened even with Alexander winning the war, what assimilation did. Because the freedoms and comforts have also their challenges. The challenges of complacency, of apathy, so much of what has happened over the last few centuries. And as we'll soon talk about, the events today don't allow us to be apathetic. But then the Rebbe says something unbelievable. That was then, 7 generations after the Alter Rebbe. Now we could enter into France, and we could enter into the Western world. And now we are more mature spiritually, and we have the power. Not just to withstand the challenges of the Western world and the secular world and the scientific world, but to transform it into a divine home. And the Rebbe talks about the march, the French anthem, the transformation of it, Simchas Torah, Tovshin Lamed Aleph, 1973. We're talking about right after the Yom Kippur War, 50 years ago. Comparing it to Napoleon's march, which was turned into a nigun of Netzach, and we sing Yom Kippur at the end of Yom Kippur. Transformation of the Western world. Vayeshev Tavshin Nun Beis. Check it out. Very, very fundamental sikha, especially in this context. So what we can learn from the Mittler Rebbe and his predecessor, the Alter Rebbe, is how we look at a war like this. Today, we're already after the 7th generation, so we're not concerned. We have the power, not just to militarily vanquish our enemies, but to transform the Western world, and including the Arab Muslim world, the children of Ishmael. So in addition to what has to be done militarily, we also have lessons on a deeper level of these battles. And interestingly, we're reading about them all in these week's parshas. Tes and Yud Kislev is always in this parsha, Vayetze, close to Vayishlach. The battles of Yaakov with Lavan, and then battles of Yaakov with Esau. Yud Tes Kislev leading to Yud Tes Kislev was again, is in the parsha Vayishlach. And the mere fact that the Alter Rebbe sat in prison, and the Mittler Rebbe sat in prison, and was released on Yud Kislev, was all part of that challenge. Why were they sitting in prison? Because the world was not yet ready for godliness, and they saw these great holy men as threats. So we see that also as a vindication of what the Alter Rebbe was doing, what the Mittler Rebbe was doing, is teaching Torah, teaching Chassidus, which is all a precursor to the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema. So they were fighting to bring Geula, but the world resists. So there are battles to be fought. But we have that clarity, and we understand that on a cosmic level, on a historical level, going back all the way to the biblical level. There's a big picture unfolding here. And the Rebbe indeed says that the Geula of the Mittler Rebbe, which was Yud Kislev, the first year wasn't celebrated because it was literally a day after the Mittler Rebbe's yahrzeit, because the Geula was a year before he passed away. So it wasn't celebrated, obviously, that year as powerfully, but it's a Geula. And the Rebbe says, and you see that Geula brought Harchov in Yefutz Meinesecha Chutza more than ever. Because that was the kavanah of the Mittler Rebbe's Maimorim, is Bina Recheva Sanor, to take the ideas that are more summarized, more concentrated by the Alter Rebbe, and expand them like rivers Yafutzu ma'nesecha chutzu, yafutzu, spreading them, distributing them to every corner. And the Mittel Rebbe was, of course, a key step in that process, which only continued as we went on the generations. So the lessons today in the seventh generation, and in the seventh generation after so many years, since Tovshin Yud, we're now paid Dalet. We're talking about 74 years. That only expanded the spreading of Chassidus, the spreading of Torah. That is our mission. Again, not just a mission to fight the darkness, but to use the darkness as a springboard for total transformation. As the Rebbe explains, that one of the reasons Chassidus was revealed in the later generations, because of the deeper darkness. At the same time, it's also the dawning of Moshiach and Geula. And the Rebbe explains they're interconnected. Before the dawn is always darkest. So the fighting of the darkness and the assimilation, an example of the Alter Rebbe, that Chassidus is like the crown of the king, that precious stone that has to be crushed to save a child that may be dying, referring to the comatose, spiritual comatose state of the Jewish people. You take Chassidus, the most precious stone of Primius Atera, Rosa Daraisa. So Chassidus has come to heal. Chassidus comes to transform. When I say heal, it means it's not just a medicine. It also is one. It's so powerful that it can also serve as healing, as the Rebbe explains in Kuntzes Sinyon Shel Teres Chassidus, which was originally said in Yutas Kislev, Tavshin Chavav, 1965, end of 1965. So all of that demonstrates that these events that are coming in this Chedesh HaGeula of Yutas Kislev, you have Yudalet Kislev, you have Reish Chedesh Kislev, are all part of the unfolding drama of a world that is resistant, but its resistance is coming to an end. Last gasps, the dark before the dawn, and the dawn breaks, the dawn of Geula, and the well springs are spread outward to every corner of earth, and no more evil and destruction will be perpetrated, because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. The words of Yeshaya Hanavi, quoted by the Rambam at the end of his magnum opus Mishnah Torah. That's the picture. Okay. Let's go to now the next section. Let's deal with actions. Is there a spiritual action that can be taken right now to speed up the redemption of our captives in Gaza? Well, before we get to that question, let me say this. Actions, I think to sum up what I've said till now, actions in practical meaning is that this is a time of spiritual war. Spiritual war, we have to be not reactive, but we have to move to proactive mode. In a proactive mode, it means we need to initiate, not just wait. So the general approach has to be that each of us has to mobilize ourselves and say, what can I do today? Not wait for someone's instructions. What can I do today to add a mitzvah or add the intensity of doing the mitzvah? Whether it's putting on tefillin for men and boys after bar mitzvah, whether it's Friday night, Friday before Shabbos, for sundown, for women and girls to light candles, some mezuzah on the door, unity and achdus, chinuch of our children, especially mi'elim v'yenkim yisadet ta'ez lahashbis evim misnakim, the mouth of babes, of sucklings, yisadet ta'ez, established E's of Torah, strength of Torah, lahashbis, to eliminate enemies. And all the mitzvahs I mentioned all have as gula, a unique feature that helps either drive fear or eliminate our enemies. So to initiate, but initiating goes even further, not just doing it yourself, but influencing others. Every person should say, you know what, every day I'll reach out to 5 new people. In your sphere of influence, be it people at work, could be vendors, customers, doctors, lawyers, people we interact with, and strangers as well. This is called being proactive. That's what happens in a time like this. That's the wake-up call. So as far as actions go, that should be the mode. And specific actions, I made some suggestions, but obviously the sky's the limit. I don't want to, once you say too much, people don't end up doing anything. Choose. On the contrary, everyone has their things that they desire, that they connect with. But the key thing is a forward-thinking, proactive approach. Not just being on the sidelines and waiting. That's not the way you fight a war. So that's an overall call to action. But let's now go to some of the questions. So the first question, is there a spiritual action that can be taken right now to speed up the redemption of our captives in Gaza? So someone wrote more in detail. With reference to YouTube, where you talked about the other side of Kabbalah. So I was talking about that there's Kabbalah can be used, God forbid, in a negative way. Is there a spiritual action that can be taken right now to speed up the redemption of our captives in Gaza? Can sending light with the intention of illuminating the darkness in the minds of the terrorists bring about change? So, our spiritual actions are not supernatural, are not sensational. They are called Torah mitzvahs. These are our spiritual weapons that Hashem gave us. So every time you do a mitzvah, that's exactly what it does. It generates light. It triggers things above and below that has definitely impact. And today, knowing physics, science, we know the butterfly effect. One little thing in one corner of the world affects every other part of the world, whether you see it or not. Yichud zeh, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, the yichud, the unification that a mitzvah does is nitzchi le'elam v'ad. Nitzchi above, le'elam v'ad, forever, has a perpetual effect. So that's the first thing that we deploy, those spiritual weapons. As far as deeper type of things, I do have a section I want to talk about. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but alternative interventions. People talk about building a goylam and other things, but Bichlal Torah is Tomim Tiyim Hashem Alekecha. Go the straight path, Derech Yeshara. The straight path is Torah and mitzvahs. Eibishter gave us Torah Er, Ner Mitzvah Torah Er. These are the ways that you illuminate the world. Which mitzvah? As I said, there are some that are primary in a sense in this type of that are actually called weapons in a way, spiritual weapons. But all mitzvahs have this power. A mitzvah geredes mitzvah. And there's the mitzvah to have a zoyer beit fei, that people have particular things that they are inclined to. It all goes into that arsenal. Okay. Is it possible that Moshiach did not come yet because we still do not have complete unity, especially considering the sickening sight of Jews marching with the enemy? So let's read that more in detail. At the Washington rally, 300,000 people were united in a beautiful manner. But across the street, the Natura Carta rabbis, I don't know if you can call them that name even, were spewing vile anti-Semitic Hamas propaganda which destroyed the overall complete unity of all Klal Yisrael. What is their problem, and what can we say to them in a peaceful way to get them to stop their hate speeches and join the rest of Klal Yisrael in the loving, complete unity? And is it possible that Mashiach didn't come yet because our community doesn't have this complete unity? I want to reserve talking about them and dealing with them for a later section, either in this program or in a future one. But as far as in general, absolutely, that's part of our initiative. That's part of our proactive approach to do everything possible to create unity in our lives. Firstly, unity within yourself, unity in your family, unity in your community, unity with people that you may have had differences with. Because we're all brothers, we're all sisters, we're all brothers and sisters, we're all one family. Just read Tanya Perek Lamed Beis. Regardless of externals, regardless even of disagreements. Av echad l'kolonu, kulan masimis, miyadei g'dulosim malosim, all the expressions the Alter Rebbe uses. And when nafshe iker v'gufei tofel, when the iker is the nefesh and not your body and your own selfish needs, that's what leads to real love. That's why Torah is called love. Hillel says, Zuhi kol Torah kula, ma da'olach soni l'chavercha le'saveh. Don't do it to others that you dislike doing to yourself, meaning love, basically. So that's for sure. As far as people who don't seem people you can even speak to, I don't even know if they're Jewish or not Jewish, to be honest. Who knows? Who cares how a person dresses? Whether they're being paid, how much they're being paid, or whatever reason, they're distortions. If you have someone you know like that, you can have a conversation with that you feel you can have hashpah, by all means. I know some people you just can't speak to. They're completely brainwashed. But as I said, I don't want to really speak about that. I do want to speak to the unity point, that of course is possible. And there's no question that we have total unity in a true, sustainable way. That is the keli for shalom, and the keli for peace and completion and for geula. And that's what the whole Torah came to do, was to bring shalom to this world. Okay. Should we celebrate our redemption from this time of difficulty in advance? Being that I'm speaking about how we know this is all leading to geula, so the question in detail goes like this. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, should we celebrate our redemption from this time of difficulty for Klal Yisrael in advance? Was there any precedent for doing so while the Rebbe was here, alive, physically? For example, should we compose a nigun to thank Hashem in advance for taking us out of these difficult times and the freeing of the hostages? Should we make a celebratory suda? Thanks so much. I had a similar question last week, and the answer is, Ivdus Hashem b'simcha, that we should go with simcha, with joy, and with confidence, and with hope, and absolute conviction that we will prevail, absolutely. But there are halachas of when you celebrate and when you don't celebrate. When you make bichas hagrem was only after you get out of the situation. So though we know that there's the custom of marching even before the first battle with a march of victory, but that's not the same thing as a celebratory march after the battles are fought. So you have to use discretion and intelligence here. We go with that full confidence. No, but we don't necessarily do a sudas heidah. You don't make heidah till afterwards. Talk about the Rebbe personally, when he had the heart attack, Tov Shalom El Ches, he made a sudas heidah, was Zeis Chanukah, but after he got out of it, he didn't make it after Simchas Torah. That's on a personal, or you could say the Rebbe is not personal, on a collective level. But the same idea. To compose nigunim that give us hope and so on, by all means. But you have to know the difference between what geula actually is and how you prepare for geula. It's not the same exact category. One more question about actions is this. In our religion, the Torah gives us many second chances, such as Pesach Sheni and Yom Kippur Cotton. Do you think it's a good idea for the rabbis to establish a Simchas Torah Sheni for all those that weren't able to dance on Simchas Torah because of the war? Well, from a purely halachic point of view, the answer is obviously no. You know, if we know Pesach Sheni is Pesach Sheni, we don't make a Chanukah Sheni, we don't make a Purim Sheni. No, even though it's Purim Cotton, but not Purim that afterwards. The Torah mandates and the Pesach Sheni. So the Torah says so, you say so. So that's clear. When I mentioned before Zeis Chanukah, the Rebbe didn't make a Simchas Torah Sheni, even though he washed and gave a Koshel Bracha, and he basically wanted to compensate and live up to everything that he would have done. But it's still Chanukah, Zeis Chanukah. So the point being is, for those that, for whatever reason, could not celebrate, they went to war. Actually, going to war is also part of celebration. They went to protect Eden. When we say Pekuach Nefesh Deicha Kol HaTorah Kula, say Deicha, doesn't mean it overrides. It means it becomes, that's the way Torah is sanctified. That's what it says. You sanctify Shabbos when you save a life by desecrating Shabbos. You're not desecrating Shabbos, you're sanctifying it. So Simchas Torah took on a different form and shape. We'd rather it didn't, but it did. Can they compensate in other ways? Yeah, the time will come when they have the opportunity, or even now you see the soldiers and military dancing and singing on a regular day. You can say in a way they're doing that. But I would be careful. We're not talking about designating a day. We're talking about the spirit of it. Absolutely. That's what Judaism teaches us, that anything lacking, you can always compensate for and double and triple. That's the whole concept of a Shnas HaIbur, of a leap year. That's not just that you fill the discrepancy, the 11 and a half days between a lunar year and a solar year, but you actually add more, a whole month, as the Rebbe emphasizes. So we're not just filling the void, but filling it up, but adding even more. So that is a general approach, but that's not the same thing as establishing a particular day. Should there be remembered October 7th? We should remember only good things, and we should remember that that was a day that woke us up and and woke us up from apathy to become proactive soldiers, proactive Jews in bringing God and light to the world. Okay. Since we're talking about the rally was mentioned, let's talk about I got quite a few letters about the rally. Let's talk about the rally. Reactions to the rally. Will we be helped by the unity and good resolutions at the rally? If it says the Shekhinah dwells when 10 Jews assemble together, it is implied when 300,000 Jews gather together, especially for Jewish unity, and to publicly do the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael by gathering in Washington to pray for the hostages, that a deeper level of the Shekhinah is revealed. Does davening with such a large group have a better chance of Hashem answering the prayers? Affirmatively, than if someone davens with a smaller group of 10 people. At the rally, I prayed for the safe return of the hostages. I hope Hashem listens and helps them return safe to their families right away. Amen. So, it's not about a competition of how many people come together. Of course, we know that a minyan 10 has a particular synergy that one person doesn't have. That's why it says, that one can accomplish what 10 accomplished the rest of the year. And 100, it's not the halacha, but when you come to benching, you change certain nusach. So you clearly see that numbers matter. So there's no question that when you have such a showing, that the Shekhinah is dwelling there more stronger than ever, especially when it's Avos Yisrael, especially when you do a mitzvah and a tefillah. So the answer is absolutely. But I don't want to take away if 10 people, whatever reason, couldn't go to the rally and they got together and made a minyan. Or if it's a few people, it has its power. Shneim sheyeshim eiskim b'teira, 2 people who learn teira also. Then there's 10 people. And there's the different levels. So the answer is absolutely yes. And in that sense, that's exactly why every rally should have, even though the Alter Rebbe says that when Jews come together, the Shekhinah is shriya, even if they're not Esau containing mitzvahs, but how much more so when they are, to have Teira Veidim Milos Chasodim. So the answer is absolutely yes. And we're all praying that alone, and of course all the other acts of unity and connection, should ultimately lead to the neighbors to listening to our prayers. Yes, release the hostages, but more than that, bring the Geula Amitis Vashlema. Okay. Next question. How can you not appreciate the contrast of our peaceful rallies and the enemy's aggressive ones? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I went to the Israel rally in Washington. It was a beautiful Kiddush Hashem to see over 250,000 people behaving appropriately. There was no hate speech, no violence, no vandalism, and nobody left trash on the floor. Just a beautiful united message from Jews of all backgrounds showing hope that the hostages will be returned and that peace will be restored. In contrast, the Sitra Achre, the other side, had their anti-Israel rally in the same place a week earlier and set fires, called for genocide, vandalized public property, and threw things at the police. It's clear as day to see who's on the right and wrong side of this war. In my daily life, I'm a class clown of a person. Well, before I read that, okay, so my response to that first half of the question, or comment, yeah, absolutely. It's beautiful to see, and I wish the whole world would see that. It tells you a lot about intentions, just like it tells you the difference between how Israel fights a war and how the enemy fights the war, in dealing with civilians. To spell it out, Israel will do everything possible to protect the civilian. That's why it's outrageous when I see that Israel has to defend itself to prove why they went into hospital. As if Israel is interested in killing innocent patients. Why do we even have to be on the defensive? Hamas should be on the defensive. Why they're hiding in a hospital? Why they're using a hospital as their military operation and so on. Okay. So there's no question that becomes very, very clear. But then comes the second half of the question: is it appropriate to protest against the enemy, or should we just focus on the positive in that spirit? So this fellow continues to write, in my daily life, I'm a class clown type of person. I decided to bring a sign that made fun of Ayatollah Khamenei, the Iranian leader that finances terrorism against us. I don't know if that's his name. I think that was the previous Ayatollah, but what difference does it make? Most people loved my sign and laughed when they saw it. I told one woman that I was able to make you smile and bring you joy when it was completely worth it to drive 5 hours to get here. Halfway through the rally, one person came up to me and said he thought my sign was not appropriate and I should take it down because most signs had photos of the hostages and he felt I'm making a joke out of a serious situation. I explained myself by saying that after everything the terrorists put us through this month, we have a right to have a laugh at their expense. After a minute or two of arguing in a peaceful manner, I told the man that although his opinion has validity, and that even though I don't completely agree with him, if my sign bothers him so much, I'll take it down and put it in the garbage can. What began as a disagreement between strangers ended with a hug and an invitation from my family to come for a Shabbos meal if we are ever in Baltimore, and my reply that I would love to invite his family for Shabbos if they are ever in New York. I walked away thinking about how beautiful our community is, because even when we have disagreements, we can work them out peacefully, because our love for each other is stronger than any disagreement. This is also proof to me that Moshiach's arrival is imminent. Beautiful. What shall I say? Beautiful. I wish everyone could learn from that. Not getting into the merits of doing it, not doing it, but I will say, in answer to the question, our focus should be on the positive. We're not there to have pictures of the enemy and cross them out and say, kill them all. What has to be done. But we don't sing praise like Hashem told the angels, even when the Egyptians were drowning. We cry that we have to do it. We are fighting for good. Freeing the hostages, yes. Fighting on behalf of the military, the Israeli military. Protecting innocent people. That should be our focus. Not the obliteration of the enemy, and definitely not in any way through images and so on. That's in general. But above all, the approach that you guys are able to figure it out, beautiful. As I said, if we can bottle that, and we can replicate that, and scale it, that is unity. That brings peace, and that brings geula. No question about it. So thank you for that. Since we're talking about Kiddush Hashem, let me read to you something that I received actually right after October 7th. And I thought it would be very well worth reading about a Kiddush Hashem. Just didn't have the opportunity, but this seems to be a good segue. Let me just find it. Kiddush Hashem, beauty of the Jews. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I'm writing to inform you of a beautiful thing that happened Erev Rosh Hashanah in our community, upstate New York. It says Erev Rosh Hashanah, before all this chaos. We announced that Ma'ariv would start 7 p.m. Friday night, Rosh Hashanah. A group of people showed up half hour early and brought musical instruments and were singing Avinu Malkeinu, and other Rosh Hashanah songs on the front steps of our shul. In between the songs, someone gave a synopsis of the Rebbe's famous sikha about why we don't blow shofar on Shabbos. Rosh Hashanah was on Shabbos. When it was time to light candles, they put away their musical instruments so they wouldn't violate Shabbos and Yontiv, but the singing and dancing continued a few more minutes until we began Ma'ariv. When I asked what inspired them to do this, someone said that they heard Rabbi Jacobson say on his Sunday night podcast that it's a good idea to end the year on a high note and have as many Hakel gatherings as possible with Torah teachings and music and dancing, so they wanted to have a final community Hakel of 5783 that overlapped into the beginning of 5784 to end the year and begin the new year on a high note. I can't begin to explain how powerful and meaningful our davening was when it began in such a tremendous way. I know Hashem is proud of what we did here and will answer everyone's davening positively for amazing brachas for the new year. I want to thank you, Rabbi Jacobson, for inspiring this and let you know the impact of your great Torah classes. With best wishes for a sweet new year. Thank you. What should I say? This is Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, we know, is always 2 weeks right before Sukkot. And the end of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres is Simchas Torah, the Rabbeim say that which we accomplish Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur through tears, through awe, through reverence, we accomplish Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah to Simcha. So Jewish people, demonstration of such a Kiddush Hashem, such beautiful behavior, the end of Hakil of last year, and to go into the year with that, I am sure will serve us all well. That's not a question. We don't know why, what happened to Simchas Torah, why a thing like this was not enough for Hashem to prevent that to happen. But to see that gives you hope. And we're seeing it now, unfortunately, now in tragic circumstances. But this is Mi Kamchi Yisrael Goyechad Ba'aretz. So I felt appropriate to read this. As I said, I received this this was received by me, I think even before Simchas Torah, if I recall. But I was going to read it right afterwards because I just felt it was such a beautiful way of how Jews demonstrate their love for God, their love for each other, unity going into Rosh Hashanah. So as I said, may it serve well, exactly as you said, that it should indeed be transformed into the best year possible, where all this yogin, all this pain will be transformed into tremendous simcha, and especially the simcha of the Geula. Okay. Now with that, let me see here. Oh, so much more to do. I always feel I can end up doing more than I really realistic, but okay. Let me conclude with so many important topics to cover. Let me conclude with a parsha. So, Leben mit der Zeit. We live with the times. And uncannily, the story of these parshas is literally the stories of what's going on right now. The battles in the house of Avram Avinu, back in Lech Lecha, we talked about it. The Bris Ben Absarim, Avram being shown the empires to come, the suffering the Jews would go through, and then Achrei Ken Yetzu B'Rechush Gadol, and how they would come out with great wealth, physical and spiritual. And same with the other empires. The birth of Ishmael, the birth of Yitzchak, the banishing of Ishmael, then Ishmael doing tshuva. We read in the end of, that was in the Parsha Vayera, and then Parsha Teldus. Or Parsha Vayera, that Chayesara is Ishmael's passing and doing tshuva. And the Balaturim at the end of Parsha Teldus. And now we come to Parsha Vayetze. Let me correct myself. The end of Parsha Chayesara. Then came Parsha Teldus, the battle between Yaakov and Esau, which we discussed last week. All part of the unfolding story that would happen through the generations, as discussed. Now we come to Parsha Vayetze. Vayetze Yaakov me Be'er Sheva. He's running to go escape from Esau, and also to find a shidduch, to Charana, Vayela Charana. And he has the dream. V'nei Hashem nitzav alav. He has the dream of the ladder, the angels going up and down. And then he wakes up and realizes where he is, like we discussed before, Shara Shamayim, the gate to heaven. And he's concerned, he's afraid of going to Charan. Charan is the wrath of God, Charein Shel Mokim, from the word Charan, Charein. The antithesis to Eretz Yisrael, which is a holy land. And Hashem promises, don't be afraid. Ufaratz the Yom Avakeim of Tzafein of Negba. You will build a great nation. They will spread east and west, north and south. And the continuing story of his struggles with Lavan, the charlatan, the thief, the criminal, and finally building his family in Charan, and then at the end of Vayetze, goes back to Eretz Yisrael, only to meet Esau, which is next week's parsha. So what do we learn from this? How does the Torah story of Yaakov's journey to Charan help understand today's events? So let's begin a few key points. The Eir HaChaim says, brought in Chassidus, Vayetze Yaakov refers to the neshama, every soul's descent to this world, to Charan, to a dark world. Elam Hazeh Agashmi V'Achumri, Moli Klippers V'Sitra Achn, in the language of the Alter Rebbe from Eitz Chaim, filled with darkness and negative, hostile energy, Charan. But it comes from Be'er Sheva. Be'er Sheva, the fountain of seven, the seven midas of Atzilus. And that's why we're afraid. But it says, Al Tira Avdi Yaakov, don't be afraid, Yaakov. Yaakov, the name Yaakov itself, Yud Ekev. the Yud of Be'er Sheva, the Yud of Elikus, going into Akev of the world, the heel, which is Malach Hamov Sheba Adam, as the Ovis the Rab Nosson says. It's the place that has the least sensitivity. But don't be afraid, Yaakov, because I'm with you. And then in the process, he has the dream of the ladder. What is the significance of the ladder? So let's read the Medrash. The Medrash says, so starting with the Ramban, the famous Ramban, he says, Ma'aseh Ovis Simla Banim. All the events that happened with the patriarchs come to teach us about the future. They were shown, says the Ramban, what would happen to their descendants. Says the Medrash Tanchuma in the beginning of this parsha, Pirkei de Rebbe Lezer, Perek Lamed Hey, cited in Bechaya and Ramban in this parsha, and the Rambam also look in Hilchos Yesod HaTorah, Perek Zayin, Halacha Gimel. Says like this, that Jacob saw a ladder on the ground and his top reached. So what was he shown? The future empires that would rule the world. The Malachim going down and up is the rise and fall of the empires. Similar to what the Medrash says about Avram by Bris Ben Absadim. So now Yaakov Avinu is also shown the empires to come. And there'd be a rise of the empires, and there'd be a fall. And all leading, ultimately, to the victory of the Jewish people, the victory of the world, embracing God's message with the coming of the Geula. So in microcosm, Yaakov's life reflects that. Yaakov goes into Haran. The neshama comes down to this world. The Jewish people throughout history, in macrocosm, go into each of the dark empires that they had to deal with. Whether it was the Egyptian empire, whether it's the Babylonian, the Assyrian, the Babylonian, the Persian, then the Roman, and the Ishmaelite empires. And all the empires throughout history that they had to contend with. So rise and fall, they would all rise and fall, but the only one that would remain standing at the end of the day is you, Yaakov, and your children. So don't be afraid, because I go with you. Like the Pasuk says afterwards. He says, I'm with you, I will protect you wherever you go and bring you back to this soil. I will not turn aside from you until I have fully kept this promise to you. I am the God of Abraham, your father, and God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land upon which you are lying. Your descendants will be plentiful like the dust of the earth. And then the key, the conclusion. All the families on earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. So it's not just for the Jews, it's a blessing for the world. What more appropriate message, as we discussed at the beginning of this program, that we are here to fulfill the promise that God gave Avram, Yitzchak, and now Yaakov about Eretz Yisrael, about the role of the Jews. Not only not to be afraid, but you will prevail. And everyone, all Nasati, and the whole, the Zarachal Kolod, the whole, that your children will be a blessing to V'nivrecha b'chal kol amei haaretz, that you and your descendants will be a blessing to the entire world. What more appropriate message that we have, and what battle we have to fight. But we have to contend with the Haran of our time. Haran right now is a form of Gaza, a form of other enemies that take hold in different forms and manifestations. But what do we do there? We don't just eliminate them. We build our families. That's what Yaakov did. Where did he build his family? Not in Eretz Yisrael, in Haran. Except Binyamin. All the Shvatim were born in Haran. To teach us that in this world, not only do we deal with it, are we not threatened by the challenges, but we actually build our home. This would become the foundation of the Jewish people, built in darkness, in a place called Wrath, Haran, Charen Shel Mokim, Charen Af. And then, when we do that job, we're now ready to go back to the promised land with the family, marching back, and to continue the journey, and ultimately also refine Esau and Ishmael and march to the Geula. So there we have in the chapter the story, and as it unfolds today, with the lessons that are very, very fitting and relevant, more relevant than ever. May Hashem, again, protect all the military who are defending and sacrificing for the innocent men, women, and children of Eretz Yisrael. Protect Eden everywhere. Hashem yishmer tzeischem ve'echa ma'ata v'ad elam. Hine le'yonam v'le'yishn shemi Yisrael, especially in the Holy Land, the Promised Land. Eretz asher eni Hashem lekecha ba mereshis hashana v'ad achris shana. And we should indeed march into the Gula Amitis Vashlema and do our part, our proactive part in the spiritual war. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 472. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Check out ChassidusApplied.com where you can submit any question, any comment, and let's join together in this tremendous final battle to bring the Geula. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at ChassidusApplied.com/donate.